So, welcome. Um, Good morning, Scotty, and good evening, Erin and Lou. um, we're engaged in this class called Embracing Freedom, and it's focused on the practice of renunciation, also known as a definite emergence. And this is the third class in the series of four. So we'll begin as we normally do by doing a short breathing meditation. We'll set our motivation, say some prayers together, and then we'll begin the class. So get comfortable in your seat. Just try to make sure your back is straight and you can close your eyes or keep them open. Place your hands wherever you like and just feel comfortable within yourself. And you can do this easily by letting the body breathe itself. And as the body breathes itself, you will be aware of the movements that take place whenever you inhale breath or exhale the breath. You may even become aware of the feeling tone associated with each breath. So focusing on the breath allows the mind to become focused and the body to generally relax. And with the mind focused and relaxed, it's very easy to imagine the presence of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in your room. They are in the space above you, whereas in the space that's level with you are all sentient beings. These include your parents, your friends, people you've had misunderstandings and difficulties with, and strangers. Now, what your parents and you have in common, what you have in common with your friends, your enemies, and strangers, is a wish to be happy and a wish to be free from suffering. And these two wishes can be met and accomplished by relying upon the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the Dharma protectors, and the Arya beings, which are in the space above you. So decide to put an end to your own suffering and to develop all of your good qualities by relying upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, with a wish that you're not doing this just for yourselves, that you wish to bring to enlightenment your parents, your friends, those difficult people and strangers. And you have confidence that you can do this by relying upon the Buddha, his teachings, the Dharma, and the spiritual community. Because not only are these three sources of refuge reliable, but you have within yourself the actual cause to become enlightened, which we call Buddha nature. And you have a host of good qualities that can be further developed. And they can be further developed because the mind, like all phenomena, are empty of inherent existence. The mind being empty of inherent existence, lacking inherent existence, it means you can develop the mind. And our lack of suffering and the happiness we seek is dependent upon developing the mind. So join me with the knowledge that the refuge field of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is present. And say along with me, I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And in response to this wish of ours, articulated in the refuge prayer, supported with the wish for enlightenment, imagine that rays of light and nectar pour out of the heart of the Buddha and wash over you and over all the beings surrounding you. These lights and nectars wash away every hindrance and obstacle to becoming authentic refugees. Wash away every obstacle to our devotion and faith in our teacher, the teachings, and the spiritual community. So the mind is completely open and receptive to the teachings. There's faith in the teacher, the teachings, and the community. And so thinking of all of those who surround us, we wish that all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is without suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And again, in response to this prayer of ours, our lights and nectars pour out of the heart of the Buddha. They wash over us and over all the beings surrounding us. And every obstacle and hindrance to us having immeasurable compassion, immeasurable love, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity are completely dispersed, and the mind obtains this open, proactive, virtuous state. And so now with the sense of devotion to the Buddha and the field of refuge, we say, reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own and others' merits to the great enlightenment. Now, just in case there's a sense of clinging to the merit or clinging to ourselves or to the goal, we can release that all now by recognizing that all phenomena lack inherent existence. And with that acknowledgement, we can imagine our body turning into a pure land. which we're going to offer to the Buddha and the refuge field as a cause for a place for us to give teachings to others in the future. So having the body utterly transformed into a pure land, we say, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnayatayami. So release the offering, and the Buddha has accepted it and he's looking at us with delight. And we look up into his face and into his eyes and we see that delight expressed. We feel accepted and at ease. And an emanation of the Buddha leaves his heart and it moves through space to come abide above the crown of your head, facing in the same direction you are. This emanation of light descends, entering the crown of your head, coming down through your body to rest at the level of your heart, whereby its light begins to expand, filling your body and mind with light. And the light bursts out through the pores of your skin and starts to fill the 10 directions of space. And wherever beings inhabit space, they're touched by this light and utterly transformed into the fully awakened state. And they are no different than us, and we are no different than them. In fact, the terms us and them no longer apply. The existence of opposites, like inner and outer, you and I, us and them, have utterly vanished into this non-conceptual state. We see that they have no true existence. Now, the light and energy, in fact, the forms of each enlightened being contained within that light, now leaves the 10 directions of space and retreats, re-entering your heart. It's completely one in nature with your very subtle mind. And you find yourself breathing normally and naturally, sitting in the chair you're in. You feel embodied once again. And you know that this was a meditation done on the level of imagination and has placed a predisposition upon your mind to attain a fully awakened state. So having the Buddha nature is the cause for enlightenment. What you've just done is added another condition for enlightenment to take place. So now you breathe in deeply through your nostrils, and you exhale through your mouth, and you allow your eyes to flutter open. And you find yourself in front of your screen, sitting on your seat, about to partake in this class. So let's have a look at what we're going to do today. We're going to look again at what renunciation is, but from a different perspective, a newer perspective. And this is the perspective from a great person, a person involved in the Mahayana path. And we're really going to look at how to begin the practice of renunciation at this level. And these are just some of the books I've relied upon. You see, they're nearly all based around this term called bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment. So over here on the left, Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, I think this is volume 3. You can see it's called The Way of the Bodhisattva. Path to Enlightenment by Geshe Thupten Loden has the whole path to enlightenment from a lamrim perspective. There's a huge section on developing the mind of enlightenment. Geshe Lobsang Gatso has got terrific material here on how the mind of enlightenment is looked at and practiced from the mind-only point of view, and also the middle way point of view. And here, this book called Compassion by Jeffrey Hopkins, and Introduction to the Middle Way here. There's the Hopkins book has got a section on the middle way, and this one here, of course, is the complete middle way and a commentary on it. And there's a very, very good section in there on compassion and the different ways you can develop the 3 forms of compassion. This book here called Gradual Awakening is a commentary on the 3 principal aspects of the path. So you see in there the practices of the small scope being, which we talked about first of all, then the practices of renunciation in the middle scope, and then this bodhicitta and the view. This book here called Buddhism by the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron is a complete presentation. And it's basically sums up about 9 or 10 books in this particular series. And finally, here we have Achieving Bodhicitta. And again, this book here is sort of divided into 2 sections. One on how it's developed in the 6 causes and 1 effect method, and the other on equalizing and exchanging self for others. I particularly like it because it's got a number of questions coming from the students, and Geshe Thachen answers these questions. You'll find something useful to take away from any of these. It just depends upon what sort of level you're at. Some of them take a bit more time, but as time goes by and the mind becomes more pliant and you get it, you see, wow, that's really valuable. Especially this one here, bodhicitta. There's a great section that's sort of saying what it's not and how people can to sort of mistake it. So this is by Venerable Lobsang Gatso. So he was at one time head of one of the colleges in Dharamsala, and I think he was murdered at some time. But I think it's a terrific book. So this is what I've sort of relied on for this particular class. And again, if we look at this quote I've been using for the last 2 classes, here we're really talking about parting from the 4 attachments. And this teaching arose in a vision to Kanga Ningpo when he was about, I think, 12, 13 years old. And in it, Manjushri spoke to him and said these words. So if you are attached to this life, you're not a true spiritual practitioner. If you are attached to samsara, you do not have renunciation. If you are attached to your own self-interest, you have no bodhicitta. And if grasping arises, you do not have the view. So last week, we spoke about this attachment to samsara, and we did some meditations on the view. Today, we're particularly going to have a look at this idea of what was this self-interest and what is this bodhicitta. So again, just to keep reminding you of what this renunciation is. So it's a determination to be free from samsara and achieve liberation. So this renunciation has to contain these two parts: freedom from samsara and the achievement of liberation. How is it done? By giving up true suffering and its causes. And the giving up of it is this, renunciation. And this is based on the belief that there's a possibility of true cessation and true paths, that freedom actually exists. And we can have this valid belief in it because this was actually the experience of the Buddha himself. Through his own renunciation of samsara, his development of this wisdom that produced the true cessations, these true paths that produced the true cessations. He found freedom and shared it with others. And the sharing process has been going on for about 2,000 years now. So we've got these things, these true sufferings and its causes. So this is what we call samsara, to be free from samsara. Samsara is created through these causes. And in the first two classes, we looked at some of those causes. Last week, we focused sort of a bit more on the karma aspect. Today, I'll just have that large, one of the large sheets talking about all the different sufferings. Today, I just want to look at these, sort of the afflictive side, the mental side. So we have these types of affliction. So these have been coming from the mind itself, right? Attachment, ill will and hatred, ignorance, deluded pride, and what's called ideation. And these are the remedies on the other side. So to free oneself from attachment, we meditate on ugliness or the unpleasant. And so when you have a look at the Lamrim Chenmo, there's quite a number of different ways of tackling this attachment. Then we have ill will and hatred, and this ignorance. So you can see here, these are like the three roots, aren't they? Attachment, hatred, and ignorance, symbolized in the wheel of dependent origination by the snake, the pig, and the rooster, or the pigeon. Then we have pride of being attached to the aggregates, also called deluded pride, and ideation. So ideation is referring to a specific type of thinking or conceptualizing. And it's when the conceptual process is sort of out of our control. It's just sort of like running on empty, I guess you'd say. It's a churning of the mind. So if you've ever felt you're going mad at sometimes, that's it. Right? That's an example of it. And what they often try to do, and it's a very common meditation they give us, is just to slow down, focus on the breath, give yourself a neutral object. And this calms the thinking right down. And once the thinking is down, then you can move across to more positive aspects. So we've looked. So out of these three here are the main ones of what we call the 10 non-virtuous behaviors. We had these ill will and hatred, this type of ignorance, and a form of attachment. So these are driving everything, the first three. And out of these three come our different behaviors, our activities, the actions. They might be things like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, harsh speech, and so forth. So these have got to be given up gradually all the way through the path. So sometimes we stop the result by just deciding I'm not going to do that behavior. But here we're really looking at the causes. So okay, to really put an end to these results, I've got to really knock these causes out. So in our first class, we looked at how we need to start doing. We need to do this for ourselves first of all. And what we want to do is to prevent ourselves taking an unfortunate rebirth upon the occurrence of our death. We do not want to find ourselves in the lower realms. So we stop things like killing, stealing, and so forth. But we still find ourselves being reborn in cyclic existence, and hopefully it'll be, like I said, in the upper realms as a human being with the leisure and opportunity to engage in a path again. And so that's our first step. Then, like last week, we look and go, well, wherever I'm born within cyclic existence, it's problematic. So I need to work at a deeper level. I've got to work at the level of cause. And these are, like I said, so these are the major causes. And when we're doing this, we're developing, what we call renunciation. I want to give up the causes of my own suffering so that suffering will stop for me. So our sequence is something like this. We first consider the suffering that we undergo, the causes and the results of it, and determine to be free of it. So we have these two forms of renunciation, one being much more powerful and authentic than the other. When we see that, it's only then after that we start thinking about others and how that thinking of others creates a sense of compassion towards them. Before, our compassion was primarily driven towards ourselves. It's a self-referential compassion. Here it becomes other-focused. And here's a sort of warning. It says that if you do not first consider your own suffering, you will not be able to reach the key point of the practice. So it's vitally important that we understand what's driving our suffering and all the different forms of suffering that we could experience. And then we see, oh my gosh, everybody else they're just like me. We're all in this mess together. And it's from that point of view, through the acknowledgement of your own, that you have this authentic, because you've brought about a sense of compassion for yourself, called renunciation. Then we move it across to the other. And saying, as there's no difference between us. Does it make sense just to work for my own welfare alone? And Lama Tsongkhapa sort of sums this up in verse 5 of the three principal aspects of the path, when he says, when you've meditated thus and feel not even a moment's wish for the good things of cyclic life, and when you begin to think both night and day of achieving freedom, you have found a renunciation. So when he's saying like thus, when you've meditated thus, he's saying when you've meditated upon those parts of the path that are concerned with being of small capacity and medium capacity. So things like fortunate human rebirth, death and impermanence, the sufferings of the lower realms, refuge, karmic cause and effect, and sort of the unsatisfactory nature of being in cyclic existence. So through going through all of that, you go, oh my gosh, there is no real happiness in cyclic existence at all. I'm going to liberate myself from all this. And my brother is not a Buddhist, but when I spoke to him about the practice of Buddhism, one of the first things he said to me was, yeah, what about everybody else? See, even without going through all this, he just quickly hopped over and went, yeah, I know what you're talking about for us, but what about everyone else? And I think it's like I said, it could straight away pop up like that. I'm sure it doesn't take much for people like ourselves who are actually studying these paths and these vehicles. So we begin to extend our wish for freedom. So we began with our own freedom. Like I said, so this depends upon a deep and a pure self-compassion. It has to be imbued with wisdom, because without just wishing to be free from suffering, but having no means to achieve that freedom, that's sort of pointless. In fact, I would suggest that it just adds another layer of suffering. If there was no way to be free, but wanting to be free, I think that'd just be terrible. So we know that the freedom does exist. We know what's driving our imprisonment. And it's primarily this misapprehension of who we are and of how things exist. And from that misapprehension, acting on it unskillfully, hurting ourselves, keeping us locked in jail. So we've decided we want to get out. We want out. But just like my brother, we'll look around and we'll see, oh my gosh, my mother, my brother, my sister, in fact, all my friends, and everyone, every human being is actually in the same place I am. And you look at the animals and think, yeah, I don't think it's just sort of like they're machines or something. I mean, dogs and cats feel pain. Fish certainly do. There's all these beings with consciousness. They're experiencing suffering too. And I'm sure they're just like me. They would like to be free of it. So the field of our attention grows greater. This wish that others might be free, it depends upon us extending what we've realized about ourselves to every other living being. And from the Bodhisattva's way of life, Arya Shantideva said this. So when both myself and others are similar and we wish to be happy, what's so special about me? Why do I strive for my happiness alone? And when both myself and others are similar in that we do not wish to suffer, what's so special about me? Why do I protect myself and not others? Well, here's the answer. It's called self-cherishing. You come across this term a lot in the text. This also has a number of different names. And this name is, I remember being at classes at Chenrezig Institute years ago, and as soon as we heard the word self-cherishing, you'd think, what's wrong with cherishing myself? And then the teacher had to explain to us that it wasn't, the word cherishing had a different sort of meaning within this context. So here, what we mean by the self-cherishing, it's a type of craving which clings and holds dearly to the self. Now, the self here is a self misapprehended. So what I'm saying, so in other words, is, so like this image here I've used, right? So there's a person in front of the mirror, right? So the person exists and self exists. So we've got two existent phenomena. But just like this guy here is misapprehending his appearance in the mirror, we misapprehend the self. Right? So self exists, like I said, in mere name, which means when you look for it, you can't find it. It doesn't objectively exist. So it exists in language as the word me or I, which is given to our body and mind. And so that's the self that does exist. So the self is not the body, it's not the mind, it's not the combination of them, and it's not something within them and independent of them. And it's not something outside the body and mind, independent of them. So if you rule out all those, and then you go, okay, so gee, it sounds like how do I exist now? So, well, in name, you're called I, just like I'm called Eddie. You know? So you got the name Eddie. That was just put on my body and mind by my parents. But then we also have the word I that's put on the body and mind by consciousness. And then we misapprehend it. We think, oh my God, it's more than that. It's more than a name. It is the body, it is the mind, or it's something independent of them. And with that misapprehension, the clinging and the craving comes to protect it or to give it what it wishes for. And if you're thinking about this type of I, this false I, I'd suggest there must be a lot of fear involved with that. A fear would naturally arise, wishing to protect this thing, this non-existent entity. I can see it's like the boogeyman, right? If you run up against him, you're not scared, you find he's not there. But if you don't have a good look, he's always there. And you're always a little worried. There's this misapprehension of I, but it's not just that, it's like the belief that what we've misapprehended is true. And this I has wishes, of course, like we do. Our normal I we have the rational existent I has wishes. But a non-existent I that's thought to be existent, we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. But this belief affects us. And so we have these different synonyms for the term self-cherishing. So I got these from a book by, I think, a great teacher, although I never had teachings from myself, a man called Geshe Tegchog. So, hang on, come on now, Bixie. My little catty wants to get up on the desk. Off you go, sweetie. So Geshe Lama Tegchog called this self-cherishing a butcher. It's like, because in the old days, not so much now, but the butchers used to kill the beasts that they bought in the shops. The beasts would come in alive, and the butchers would kill them. And this is the thing. So self-centered is like the killer of our happiness. What can I say? It's as if you want to break out of jail. And then you got the guards shot you or killed you. Their job was to stop you, to hurt you. It's also called self-cherishing, it's also called self-preoccupation. And here Geshe Tegchog calls it self-cherishing is blind. The self-preoccupation is blind. Because it doesn't know, it doesn't see how we actually exist. It sees its own projections and thinks, this is true. What I see is true. So this is a term I particularly like. I was once told by a judge that I was the most egocentric person who'd ever appeared in his courtroom. So I became very interested in the term after that. Then I thought, well, isn't everybody? And yes, I was a troublemaker and it got me into a lot of trouble. But thank goodness overall, I ended up in a Buddhist center. I became very interested in this term, egocentricity, asking, what is it? What is it? And finally, it's another simple term for it, just selfishness. So all of these terms came out of a book by Geshe Tegchog on the 37 practices of bodhisattvas. And he was one of the authors along with Venerable Thupten Chodron. So if you ever come across that book, it's a fantastic book because the language used is so much like the language that Tibetan Geshes use. So it's a great way to become familiar with the different terms they use. And he says that, it's not, we don't, I know we do this, but we should not do it. We often blame ourselves for the things we do, the mistakes we make. He says, this is a mistake. He said, what we need to be blaming is self-cherishing or self-centeredness, self-preoccupation, this egocentricity, our selfishness. These are the mental factors. This way of craving and grasping at I is the real troublemaker. So some of you might recollect in 7-point mind training, where there's an instruction that says, put all the blame on one point. And this is the point they're talking about, self-cherishing, the point of self-cherishing. That's the fault. And I remember in fact, my first teacher, so when she gave me the text itself to study, she had a little post-it note in there, and it said, not the conventional self. Don't put your blame on you. Just in case I made that mistake. And so it's a mistake we can easily make. So I like to bring this up straight up and just tell you, don't do that. And you've probably done it in the past, but now that you know something new, you can stop doing it. It's because no, it's just a wrong awareness that's going along with the misapprehension of myself. It's an agreement with it. You know? But I know, because I've done this analysis. I know my body is not me. I know my mind is not me. I know me. I am not something independent of these two. So I don't exist like that. But this type of mind is self-cherishing, or egocentric. So I love that, because it's like that's at the center, and everything revolves around it. And I thought, well, yeah, that was my life. I thought it was the life of everybody. That's how it works. But apparently not, of course. Right? Yes, we need to put the blame on the right object. Then another quote this is from Panchen Lama Turkey Gelson. So you might know him as the author of the Guru Putra, Lama Chopa. So he says in that verse 91, this chronic disease of self-preoccupation is the cause of unwanted suffering. Perceiving this, may I be inspired to blame, begrudge, and destroy this demon of egocentricity. Isn't that great? I love that. It's sort of like, whoa, feisty. The chronic disease of self-preoccupation. I really like this because I can apply this so easy to myself, of a way of life that I used to hold to very tightly. And as he says here, may I be inspired to blame, begrudge, and destroy the demon of egocentricity. He's not saying destroy yourself. No, it's a type of mind, a type of misapprehension. Wrong idea. So these ways of talking about self-preoccupation, egocentricity, self-cherishing, are to sort of remind us of these huge disadvantages of being egocentric, of being self-preoccupied, and then to work against it. In brief, it's to inspire within us a sense of renunciation to what causes us great suffering and suffering in our relationship to others, and instead to replace it with compassion. So I'll just pause here, because the next sort of section changes a little in terms of what we're going to do about this. So do you have any questions you'd like to ask, or is there lights going off anywhere? something happening? Okay, well, I'll continue, and something might come up, and when it does, please just speak. It's okay. So up to now, we've determined that self-preoccupation is it hurts us, harms us in this life and in future lives, and it really keeps us locked in within cyclic existence. Or even if we were to achieve um, our own personal liberation, because this self preoccupation is not actually a problem if you're just seeking your own liberation. If you're just seeking self liberation, this is really not too much of a problem for you. Because there are ways of looking at this thing of called self preoccupation. There are ways where it's what they call gross, and yeah, you've got to put that aside. But there's also what they call a subtle self preoccupation, whereby you just go for your own enlightenment and leave everybody else to themselves. So you can still become like enlightened, but it's not the enlightenment of Buddhahood. If you wish to achieve your own purposes and the purposes of others, then we need to put aside this type of self preoccupation. So what do? Well, we make 5 decisions. And again, these are from the Lama Chöpa. We start off by looking at saying, I'm going to stop being partisan. So this is from verse 90. The verse is, inspire me to increase others' comfort and joy by thinking that others and I are no different. No one wishes even the slightest suffering, nor is ever content with the happiness they have. The second decision is, I shall rid myself of self-cherishing. And here it says, inspire me to see that this chronic disease of self-cherishing is the cause giving rise to my unsought suffering, and thus begrudging it as what it is to blame. This is what's to blame. And I shall destroy this monstrous demon of selfishness. Third is, I shall make cherishing others my main practice. Inspire me to see that the mind that cherishes my mothers or my kin and would secure them in bliss is the gateway leading to infinite virtues, and thus to cherish these wandering beings more than my life, even should they loom up as my enemies. And this is a good one. I actually can exchange my attitudes regarding self and others. So in brief, this is verse 93. It says, inspire me to develop a mind that understands the distinctions between the faults of childish beings who are slaving for their selfish ends alone, and the virtues of the Buddhas who work solely for the sake of others, and thus to be able to equalize and exchange my attitudes concerning others and myself. And finally, I shall exchange my attitudes regarding self and others. Since cherishing myself is the doorway to all torment, while cherishing my mothers is the foundation for everything good, inspire me to make my core practice the yoga of exchanging others for myself. So you might have heard this if you've been to Guru Pujas or read the text. These are from verses 90, I think, to 91, 1994, I think. So we've come to this practice called an exchange of self and others. So you ask, like, what's the purpose of this? Well, so like in brief, it's to do this, to inspire courage in ourselves, because this is not an easy thing to do. We're going to reverse the attitude that we've had to ourselves like all our lives. Like I was saying, when I was 40 years old, I found myself in front of a judge telling me I'm the most egocentric person he's ever had in his courtroom. And I'm going, yeah, but isn't everybody? Are we all the same like that? And recognize, of course, that, and having to challenge that belief, going, well, I mean, here I am in front of a judge. This idea might not be too good. This idea of being egocentric. Maybe there's some problems with that. And sort of spending quite a bit of time thinking about it and reading about it. And basically what you've got to end up doing, and this is why it takes a lot of courage, is to cherish others as we presently do ourselves. And this is the hard bit, neglect yourself as you presently do others. That's not, I think, we're all going to be going like that. Oh my gosh, like that does not look too easy. So thank goodness there's a lot of help for us in the text, and by having teachers who have actually been doing this for years and years and years, and their attitude has changed. And I know myself, mine has changed also, nowhere near as much as my teachers or as the text, but I know there's been some slight change. And like I said, it's primarily what really helps is just looking at the faults of it and going, oh my God, like it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Or it works only partially, but it's got a lot of problems that come along with it. So we've got to sort of reverse our former attitude of neglecting others and putting all the emphasis on ourselves. Then we've got to go, I've got to put the emphasis on you and neglect self. So here again, it's very important to sort of work out what we mean by what is self here. So again, it's like we're working against our egocentricity, this self-cherishing. These are the terms. That's the real thing. They're just mental states. Anyway, so Holiness the Dalai Lama says we have to develop this conviction. There is no practice superior to the practice of exchanging oneself for others. This is the essence of all the teachings. And so I'm going to devote my efforts to engaging in this practice, this great practice of giving and taking. If you've ever done this practice and been even a little successful, you know how wonderful it is. It really works, this practice. You just got to sort of get your thinking straight about what you're actually trying to do and what you're not trying to do. It's just getting that. It's just reversing an attitude. So I've been thinking about this and thought, okay, so I'll put together a table from what I know of the development of the mind of enlightenment, of bodhicitta, because this is part of the practices of the development of the mind of enlightenment. So I want to show you what we are renouncing or abandoning, and then what we're going to adopt in its stead. Because we're not just chucking something out and nothing coming in. Happiness has got to come in when we chuck out what's working against us. So have a little look at this table. You can see there's a bit there. I wanted to do a little bit at a time, but I can't do it. So on the left-hand side of your screen, there's all the things we want to renounce. The things that make life problematic for us. So that's what we need to get rid of. In the middle is the practices we need to do to rid ourselves of that and then bring about the result, which is the orange side. So I'll just do a couple so you can understand. I think you'll get it quite straightforwardly, really. We want to renounce, drop, move away from the sense of bias that we have towards others. I like you, I don't like you, you're this, you're that, I can only accept this. And out of that comes this social reactivity that we see all over Facebook and the news and so forth. It's really encouraged. This is what we want to move away from. So, well, how am I going to do that? So, well, there's this practice called equanimity. So there's plenty of them in the text, great explanations for how to do it, and a number of different ways you can do it. And then so what happens? He says, well, you end up being equanimous. You end up being non-biased. And then we come to the next stages. So it's the same process basically. You find out what the mind is actually doing, what we're actually thinking now. Like this one here, the second one, most people are in here because they think there's just one life. So this is the only life I need to be concerned with. And when I'm concerned with just this life, I'm concerned about me and my family and those close to me and what I care about. And so again, there's a lot of bias there, and from it will come a lot of social reactivity as well. And this is kind of as you don't understand. Future lives exist. Many beings have been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, the people that you care about right here in your room. You think these are the only ones. You go, well, at some stage, these other people here were really closely related to you. And it was the same sort of relationship. You cared as much about them then as you care about your family right now. So what if you sort of work out and go, okay, it sort of makes reasonable sense to me. What am I going to do? So you look at relationship. Over countless lives, you've been related to all sorts of beings, and everyone's been related to you in some way or another. And in fact, where did I see this the other day? I saw this thing that said we all come from that one mother in East Africa 150,000 years ago. So there's a decade-long DNA project by National Geographic, collected DNA samples from individuals in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, Tuscany, Brazil, Siberia, China, Ireland, Kenya, Puerto Rico, Iceland, Albania, and all these other places, right? They had a look at all this DNA, and it all came back to one person in East Africa, a woman. So that's just here, right? So coming out of this, like, instead of this divisiveness, right, solidarity. And what is our concern? In what way are we similar? We all want to be happy. None of us wish to experience suffering. We are the same here. And seeing that just as one's family has been kind to us in this life, your mother, your father, and so forth, I know myself, I'm guilty. I forgot their kindness. It's very easy to do, to forget the kindness of those closest to you. So we need to remember the kindness and now then have a sense of gratitude. So anyway, you can sort of see, I think, that there's a process here of working out what doesn't work on the left-hand side in the pink and dropping it. Like it doesn't work. But just the starting to drop it, I mean, you've got to pick it up again, right? Unless you put something in place to sort of prevent that. So that is the practice of meditating. You've got to become familiar with a new way of looking at it. And now the new way is reciprocity, empathy, all the positive stuff down the side here. Okay, so it's interesting, isn't it? Um, okay, I think we'll do a little meditation now, just as a sort of a summary of everything that we've gone through. So again, just get comfortable in your seat. Have your back nice and straight and let your shoulders fall down. And the first thing I've got to do is be grateful that I have this life of mine, that I'm a human being at this time in history where the Dharma still exists, and I've come across authentic teachers, and I have some faith in it. It really interests me. But this Dharma that really interests me, it's easy sort of to pollute. And the way to pollute it is to use it for just this life. Use it only for the concerns of this life. So when other lives exist, I need to be concerned about them. My concern has to move away from this life and move towards concern for future lives. Now these future lives are and will be pervaded with suffering. So just as I find suffering in this life, I'll find suffering in future lives. Because I haven't put an end to the causes of that suffering. So if I find myself within this cycle of uncontrolled existence, I will experience suffering. So I need to turn away from attachment to and preoccupation with future lives as well. I have to be free. I want to be free. And our freedom depends upon a genuine yearning for freedom. Now take that same understanding and extend it to others. Remember when your mother or your father suffered and wished to be free of it, or your brother and sister, or your children. Every one of them, when they suffered, wished to be free from suffering. They wanted to have freedom. So extend your compassion towards them. And practice being compassionate as a person of supreme capacity. As a person who knows the nature of phenomena and is therefore able to work in harmony with it and make others of primary concern. And we drop back a little and take second seat. Then I'm going to make the practice of exchanging self for other my primary practice. And then breathe in deeply through your nostrils and exhale through your mouth. And allow your eyes to blink open if they're closed. And just find yourself again in front of the screen in your seat. So in brief, these are the summary points of the practice that I just led you through. So we need to turn away from obsessive concerns about this life alone. Move toward concern for future lives. And then, reflect deeply upon the nature of suffering in cyclic existence. Because if our future lives are within samsara, it's going to contain suffering. Then we turn away from attachment to and the preoccupation with future lives as well, and generate a genuine yearning for freedom. So remember, the freedom here is freedom from an uncontrolled rebirth within cyclic existence. Understand that others are living beings just like us. They're in the same boat as us. But most of them sort of, like we at least know how to swim, or we know how to float, right? We've been introduced to these teachings. Others don't. You'll see this again and again where people that create suffering and don't even know they're doing it. They think it's coming from outside of them. Somebody else is doing it to them. So become compassionate towards them, understand them, try and help them best you can. Now, as you probably all know, if you've had teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, many years ago, so he did a lot. I mean, you have a look at some of those texts, and I've talked to some of the students who were there and took the teachings. He spent a lot of time on the lower realms. Right? It was like this, and people sort of didn't like it. A lot of people didn't like it, and they just left the teachings. And then towards the end of his life, he spent a lot of time on bodhicitta. So, it's great because I think, well, there's two forms of renunciation, isn't there? Renunciation of the lower scope, and then we've got this renunciation at the great scope. So he says here, this mind of enlightenment, of course it does, it works against selfishness. Lot less to worry about, that's good. We naturally become content and happier. This is a great thing, our joy attracts others. And it's true, life becomes truly meaningful. Now, of course, there are many other benefits of the mind of enlightenment. I thought I'd just put these 5 up as they sort of ran nicely together, and I think we could just take these and go, this applies to me now. Now, this mind of enlightenment requires a mind of renunciation as its support. You can't have bodhicitta without renunciation. One of those really early slides was sort of pointing at. When you understand your own suffering and wish to be free of it, it's called renunciation. It's also called self-compassion, extending compassion towards yourself. Realizing that most of your suffering is coming through ignorance and afflictive emotions. And you're going to have to struggle against these. You're going to have to go against ignorance and against the afflictive emotions. You have to defeat them. Lucky for us, many other people have done it and are doing it, and we've got all the books. And we've got the text, we've got teachers encouraging us, and a sangha who are doing it. And if you just try it and see that it works, then you can have conviction and be convinced. So it's a very workable thing, the Dharma. But I said, it doesn't require belief. There are some things you have to believe, you just don't know. But this stuff, no. This just requires the doing of it. So I ask this question. So when is bodhicitta becomes, when is it authentic? So I've also been in class where people ask us about renunciation. So when do you know you have it? You know? And the answer is the same for both. It is when it arises naturally without effort and remains constant. I know for myself that's not the case for either bodhicitta or renunciation. It requires a lot of effort. Right? It requires still got to go to those books, still got to train yourself. You've got to go through all the steps, because you quite find out pretty quickly, just through your own experience. I'm still creating suffering for myself. So obviously I don't have renunciation, and I still put myself in front of others. My opinion is more important than yours. We just behave like that. So I myself don't have either of these two minds. But if you have renunciation, then you've actually entered a genuine path. You're on the path. So this is a path for those seeking solitary peace, the hearers and the self-realizers. But if you have bodhicitta, which is self-directed compassion, but also compassion extended outward towards others, you've now entered the path of the Mahayana. You could say, I'm a Mahayanist. And I mean, wow, big deal. It is. It's a massive deal, isn't it? I mean, I often think of this and think, can you think of any mind that is better than a mind that wishes to develop all of your qualities to perfection, to their utmost nature, for the benefit of others? I can't think of anything like that. Anything better than that. And it can over time arise naturally because of all the effort you put in. It's just like driving cars. In the beginning, you put a lot of effort into driving a car or learning any new art. Sometimes they take years and years and years. But at the end, you can do without effort. It doesn't require your thinking or going through a text or anything or needing to know what to do. You are that person. You are the artist. You are the musician. You are the bodhisattva. Yeah, so this bodhicitta, it's a distinguishing feature of the Mahayana. Without it, we're aspiring to be Mahayanas. We're not Mahayanas, we're aspiring, and that's good. That's good. So, folks, I've sort of like come to the end of our class.
Eddie, I have a question.
Oh, great, Susan. Yep.
So we need to have, as we said earlier, we need to have self-compassion and wisdom. But how do people really know when they have wisdom? Because even when I am being egocentric, we feel like we have wisdom in that.
Right.
Especially then, maybe.
That's right. Yeah.
So how do we ever know?
Well, one of the things there'll be less of that, right? So it won't be so much I focused, it'll be more you focused. That'll be one thing about it. So, the wisdom will be, what can I say? So people like you and I, Susan, right? So as we come into contact with the texts and the teachings, when we learn about these two phenomena, bodhicitta and the wisdom, we learn about them separately. And not only that, we sort of train in them separately. Like so for instance, if I was training and this wisdom they're talking about is not ordinary wisdom. It's the wisdom realizing selflessness. So that, I mean, you learn, well, I learn about it through a lot of reading and thinking. And I sort of, I'm going to say, I sort of contemplate it. I sort of just sort of think about it and rule out things like okay, I can't, it's impossible to be the body. That you can rule that out. You look at the reason and you can rule out the mind. And it's impossible to be something independent of them. So then it's like, okay, so as a beginner, it's like that's shocking. So what's left? And you go, well, dependent. Okay, so that's, go one, depend upon cause and conditions. Yep, okay. Depend upon parts. Oh, hang on, that's a little bit difficult. And then finally, depend upon name and conception. Now, for some people, that's difficult. I think I was really fortunate to go, that's the one. You just go, you could go there and go, yeah, without name and conception, you can't say whether you exist or not. There's nothing to be said. So obviously, I do depend upon consciousness and a name. So yeah, so you can get that conceptually. Then you've got to sort of like play around and try and make it experiential. Because the reasons you'll see in the books, that's all great, because you can't fault that. That's not faultable. You'll go through and go, yeah, okay. But just thinking that's the way it is not going to make a real difference. It makes some difference because something is true now. But to get it in your bones, so to speak, to make it experiential, then we have to sort of like sit down and find or reveal the space that reveals what you're not, but that openness. And you come out and go, oh my God, I exist in mere name. Now, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I exist. You'll end up with this thing of, I've got to help all other beings. I've got to become enlightened. I've got to help everyone else. There's nothing else to do. So now it's like, okay, so now I've got to conjoin these two. So then now we sit down again. We're about to practice and go, okay, so now I'm going to just start off with the motivation. I'm going to bring to my session this wish to become enlightened for all beings. I don't have that naturally and authentically, but it starts with a wish. I have to desire this, like you want to be free. So wishing to become a Buddha means I will be free of all the disturbing emotions and the bad actions that go along with it. I want that for me, definitely. But I want enlightenment to help others. So then there's our proper motivation. And so what we do is the same, sort of done it and you go, yeah, and like there's no real me here doing that, right? There's no me that's the body, mind, or something in there or something out there that's doing it, right? So I exist in mere name. So does my goal. So does Buddha. Everything does. That's how it exists. So I'm going to work in harmony with how it exists. And away we go. And it's, of course, it's going to take time, because not only do we have to have this attitude and the wisdom realizing emptiness, even at a conceptual level, there is still these practices of refining the mind, the practices of calm abiding and concentration and so forth. Because without that, these realizations don't go down deep. They're just at the surface. It's just stuff we read, and we do our very best while we're out in the world to be that way with people. But the afflictions quickly overrule us. And again, that's primarily because the mind is unstable. It's excitable. So you go, okay, well, I've got to dampen down this excitement. What's going to do that? You say, well, concentration. I've got to concentrate my mind on what I know, on the way it is, so that when people behave normally, right, I can accept it and go, yeah, that's right. Don't be too surprised. Everyone's in samsara here. You don't need to become reactive about this. These are just people suffering. I hope that's sort of something that you can work with, Susan.
Yes, thank you, Eddie. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So is there anything else that anybody would like to say or venture forth or question?
I've got a little something, Eddie.
Great, Erin. Yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of being transparent. Especially before I met the Dharma, I've struggled with like low self-worth, self-esteem stuff. And I think for me, just hearing the words self-compassion feels really powerful.
Oh, great.
And as I start to work with that, the self-compassion, then it just naturally, like your brother, spreads out. And I wish others, to also be able to overcome their unskillful thoughts and actions that are causing suffering. So I feel kind of like now that we've jumped into the bodhicitta section, I kind of feel like I need to start with my feet on the ground a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it's so inspiring to think about bodhicitta. So I guess my question would be, does it still make sense for like maybe my main practice to be with self-compassion and compassion for others, and then just remembering I want to become a Buddha for others, and I'm aspiring to be able to exchange myself for others eventually? I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I do. I just hope it resonates with you. My take on it, Erin, is that if Buddhahood, it's not if Buddhahood is possible, but Buddhahood is possible. The person called Shakyamuni Buddha was like a human being, like you and I. Right? And I know it's mostly dependent upon the mind. You and I, we've got a mind. It's not going to just stop at the end of this life because the body is stopped. So I always think, I take the big view. It's like, well, Buddhahood's the big view. Great. I got countless lives. Until I'm enlightened, there are countless lives, right? That goal, there's no better goal than that. Like I said, the thinking that we can use now that makes sense to us, reasonable, logical, can't refute it. You go, that's the same every other life I have. That's the thought I want to come back to, because that's true. I can't fault this type of thinking. So then it has to be Buddhahood. And like I said, I don't care how long it takes, because until I'm enlightened, right, I have the opportunity to become a Buddha. That's just the natural potential of the mind. I want to awaken it. Yeah, it could take a long time. I really don't know. We don't know from where we are, do we? Who knows? It might be the very next life. Everything comes into place and you go, boom, I'm there. But we just don't know. But the potential of it we do know. This is the potential of the mind. So I go, okay, that's the potential of the mind. And I've got one, and I actually know I've got this good idea of how the mind exists and how I exist. Well, I've got a good idea of how it doesn't exist. I know it doesn't exist like that. I know I don't exist like that. I know they both exist in mere name, and so does Buddhahood, and anything that does. Therefore, it's possible. So I try to take the big one, Erin, and I go, okay, Now to get the big one, you got to take all these little steps. It's just like walking from here to China, right? You got to walk out the front door, and it's just step after step after step, and we're heading in that direction. We know what we have to do. You know, sometimes we'll mess it up. That's okay. We know the general direction. We just say sorry. No, we keep going. Yeah, that's why. I don't know whether that really helps or not, but that's just my general sort of approach to it.
That's great. Thank you.
And the other thing, Erin, is like, you know, so you've made some progress with yourself. So you can keep making progress. Gotcha. Yeah, progress. Ooh, it's big. You know, like we can't even measure the outside of the mind, can we? Let alone the universe. So it's like, wow, what we could do with this mind. And, you know, we have these living examples like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe. Gosh, there's so many of them from the Tibetan tradition, encouraging us. Really not getting on our case about our faults, because I know faults don't truly exist. You know, keep going. So we have all these lovely people to inspire us. Yeah, I've got great hopes for us as humans, beings with a mind, and in the situation we find ourselves. Okay, let's have a little look-see. And I know that, Erin, here's a picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? So he's still with us. And like, you know, if you read his book, or some of these books, he'll say, yeah, I was getting real close to emptiness at 19 years of age. But this bodhicitta, oh, I've got, yeah, that's right. You start thinking about bodhicitta, it's like, that's right. A person with some modicum of intelligence you get their head around emptiness. You might not get a direct perception of it, but conceptually they certainly can. But this one, oh boy. And yet, you know, like still towards, he's what, in his 80s now? You know, oh yeah, he's got, you know, I've got a little taste of it. And we feel it. Most of humanity knows it. You know, like this interesting man, you know, interesting sort of way of being in the world. That could be us. I mean, it's not the only one, is he? There's other people who have been very similar. So we've got a lot to inspire us. We've got these lovely texts. We've got people doing it. We've got communities even trying to do it. So that's all good. So our takeaway, what is it? Well, we do know there's a greater form of renunciation we could make, and it's the renunciation of the self-cherishing. You've got to let self-cherishing go, egocentricity go, this sort of focus on self, on the wrong conception of self and following it. We can drop that. And yeah, so this is what we're renouncing, this form of being egocentric in the world. Being number one and everyone else a long way back. And we know this is just not for our sake. It's I mean, doing it for the sake of others. We don't miss out here. This is a lovely thing. You know, we're sort of, oh gosh, I'm now going to suffer so much because of this. It's not like that. Do you know that, who was it? Nietzsche, was it? A person who can give meaning to suffering can bear a great deal of it. So any form of suffering that we could experience, we could say, oh, this is great because this is the flowering of karma. It's finished. There's so many skillful ways in the Mahayana of working with suffering because it's empty. Like I said, it doesn't have any true existence. That being the case, it's all workable. We just got to be like curious and keep on going, keep trying. So So if you can, like, have a look at some of these practices of equalizing and exchanging self for others that are often in the body cheetah books. Like you see, it's in the teachings of the Great Scope. So next week will be our final class. I'm just calling it Keeping It Together. So we'll try and sort of integrate some of the material, because you can also practice, renunciation in Hatha Yoga Tantra. There's also a renunciation in the practice of Dzogchen and Mahamudra. So I just like introduce some of those to you to see what you're actually doing, and give you a wider comprehension of some of these Buddhist techniques. Then sort of try and bring it back down to earth, and see how we can renounce suffering, causes of suffering in our everyday lives. So we've come to the end of our class today, folks, and I want to say, please, let's dedicate our merit to return of what we call Lama Zopa Rinpoche's reincarnation, the new reincarnation that it's found, that all beings find legitimate and honest teachers, especially of the Mahayana persuasion, that they too will wish to become enlightened for the benefit of others. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings abide, may I too remain to dispel the sorrows of the world. And that's the end of today's talk. So thank you, all of you, for being here and sharing it with me and giving me good work to do, meaningful work. I tell you, without it, I'd be a little bit egocentric and lost. So thank you all. And
thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, stay alive, do the best you can. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Eddie.